Well, there are many things happening in the world of Dungeons and Dragons, particularly on the business side for Wizards of the Coast this week. I'm sure you saw a lot of it. Perhaps one of the most hot button topics, or one of the most highly debated topics right now, is, of course, the recent announcement and statement that Wizards of the Coast had delivered regarding the future of race and alignment in the game. Now, this is not a new discussion for or around the game of Dungeons and Dragons, and tabletop gaming in particular. So we know that it is something that has required attention. And in the interest of inclusion and diversity, Wizards, of course, has now formalized that statement. Always polarizing. I don't think it will be any strange territory for anyone who follows TTRPGs in general, that there always seems to be this dichotomy between those who believe that the game that we love and the experiences that we share should better reflect the important issues or the topics that require our attention and cultural change in the world we live in. And then, of course, there's the other camp that believes, this is absolutely fantasy and this is really kind of an overcorrection and yada, yada, yada. Before I go into this rabbit hole, I will happily and openly say that my position on this is fairly straightforward. I also believe that the games that we play and the topics we discuss, particularly in an organic, constantly evolving environment like tabletop role-playing games, should better reflect the inclusivity and diversity that we want to see not only in those experiences but at our tables as well. So in my opinion, if this is a conscious change that Wizards is making to better represent the cultures and the audiences who enjoy those products, then I think it's their prerogative to do so, and I endorse that. It's always so much of the power in how these games play out and the experiences that we develop are in the hands of the table. I'm confused as to why people would really take an aggressive stance on this to the contrary, because realistically, all Wizards is saying is that, look, we recognize that there is a desperate need for cultural shift here. It's something that's probably been allowed to go on for far too long, and they're taking the right steps to address it. They've also been under a lot of pressure from the community to make these steps. So, I mean, what would you expect any respectful, a self-aware organization to do other than take that feedback from the community and reflect it in their games? Let's not forget that in 4E, Wizards of the Coast was horribly vilified for not listening to the feedback for the community, right? So now they're taking very distinct steps, and they have been doing so with D&D 5e. They've been taking feedback directly from the community and putting it straight into their products, almost to a point where they've become predictable, because we can get a sense of what's happening in their production offering based on what feedback the community has given. They've been that kind of dialed in, right? So you don't get to punish an organization for doing what you ask them to do and punish them for not listening to you. You know what I mean? I think what we see here, when you whittle it all down and just focus on the facts and take the emotion out of it, is an org that is diligently trying to answer the need of the community and be responsive to those needs, and at the same time be responsible in reflecting the culture that really exists around the game today. So if that is a deal breaker for you, then you have to decide whether or not that product is still the right product for you, right? I won't make comments about what that might infer based on your personal values, because that's not what I'm here to do. And that's where I draw the line around, gaming and politics. It is always in the hands of each and every table to define their own experience around these games. If you have a particular perspective on this, or let's say a particular culture is inherently evil in your world, then that's really up for you to define as a referee and a mediator of the rules. Just be conscious that if you make those kinds of choices, that you have to be aware of how people at your table feel about that too, right? So, and that just comes down to being a good human. So at the end of the day, be a good human. Is this something that really bothers you as much as it might benefit another audience, right? Like, for me, I'm not going to lose any sleep over the fact that Wizards is making this change, because I respect their ability to make that change, and I know why they're doing it. And I know that I personally happen to be for it, but let's say hypothetically, if I wasn't for it, then I don't really need to enforce that opinion because I know that it benefits more people than me, right? And I don't think it makes sense for people to really take a hard stance on this. I think it inflames and it aggravates and exasperates issues that are already, constantly very delicate. So know when it's time for you to step into a conversation, and know when you would probably do well to close your mouth and listen. And I think that's really what it comes down to. And that's my stance on the whole statement. But let's get back to the specifics of what the statement means. So they're looking to depict the beauty and humanity as reflected in the game, as they've said in this statement. They reinforce the idea that human really means everyone in the in this sphere. The players, the races, the people who are depicted in the game, and how they're presented. And they acknowledge that the D&D community is far more diverse than it's ever been, and it needs to be reflected in the game and updated to match that reflection. I think these are all perfectly reasonable approaches. Some of the diversity improvements that they're proposing for Dungeons and Dragons in the near future include addressing, of course, the orc and drow issues that have surfaced recently and over time, which I think are perfectly reasonable. There's nothing that Jeremy Crawford said himself, there's nothing that inherently means that orcs or any other race have to be evil. My favorite game was a half orc who I totally glossed over the whole Gromesh thing, which is the evil side of orcs that kind of always compels them into Gromesh's will. I actually glossed over that. I never ever once brought it into any of my character or any of my NPCs. And I loved this character who had this kind of conflict of not really identifying with either side of his human or orcish skin. But he was good. I mean, he was a good guy. He was born and raised a good guy. He was actually oppressed by other races that I guess you might call inherently good in D&D, which is also part of that challenge. So Driz, Stoerd, and Drow are not inherently evil cultures. They are cultures who live on their own, but some of them might do things that are considered evil, and that is part of that story, right? Just like no bad guy is inherently evil. We'll talk about this later in the show as well when I talk about the motivations of your big bads and how even evil guys or bad folk still often are far more interesting when they act in the interests of doing what they believe is right. Right. So, and that really comes down to the narrative and how the story manifests. It really isn't and shouldn't be tied to upbringing or culture at all, because there's no way that you can be born evil. Right. I truly believe that. So that should be reflected. Some of the other changes that they're looking to bring, of course, they'll continue to present these, particularly orc, drow races, elvish races, as complex and culturally rich in various worlds that have been recently released, like Eberron and the Wildmount compendiums. There's a focus on some source book reprints that are coming through where they're identifying some of this racially insensitive language and trying to correct that as well. They've actually enlisted the assistance of sensitivity readers and cultural consultants as well. So, I mean, you got to give them some credit, right? We don't get to sit back and land-base an organization and say, you're doing it wrong, do it better. And then they come out and say, look, here's all the things that we're doing to do it better. There will always be pundits on either side that tend to come from a particular group in the tabletop role-playing community. And you can always tell who they are because they immediately come out and make it quite obvious. But they're trying to do it right, and I think they're taking more steps over and above than a lot of organizations who probably aren't under this type of scrutiny, and good for them in that regard, I think. The current content changes to Curse of Strahd, Tomb of Annihilation, around the Vistani. Like I said, they're tackling that racially insensitive verbiage, so they're working through this, and we'll look forward to more rewrites and reissues of these as they come down the pipe. And they also alluded to a new coming product that's not yet announced that will allow players to customize their origin, including ability scores rather than benefits tied to race. And I really like this. I mean, why shouldn't you have a dexterous half-orc, right? Maybe I want to play a monk who's a half-orc, but the half-orc race is not, as optimized for that class, mechanically. So that tends to be a gate for people who might want to play explore a particular race and culture in the game, because they also don't want to nerf out their fighter or barbarian or bard in that regard. And I think that will open, I'm tired of seeing, wood elf monks. I'm tired of seeing half-orc barbarians. It's just, it always seems to be funneled in because mechanically they just make sense. How cool would it be to start seeing orcish bards or, maybe I don't know, Warforged who does slam poetry, things like that. I think it just the way I look at this, and I think the right way to look at it is an opportunity to really blow the safety off of combinations and interesting creatives around characters. And I think that is a much better way to look at these types of changes rather than fight hard to keep things in the same little pocket that you have become comfortable with over the last few editions. In other news, this is not necessarily D&D news, but it's important news for streamers and content creators. Of course, Mixer, the Xbox subset, has announced that they are folding after barely a year from launch. So they launched about a year ago, and now they're actually folding the service. Clearly, it didn't perform the way that they had expected, even though they had generated some pretty respectable growth over the last year. But in that process, they've actually struck a bargain or a deal with Facebook to migrate all of their content creators or streamers partners, and hopefully, as a result of that, some of their viewing audiences over to the Facebook gaming platform. Now, I've never really heard of Facebook gaming until this happened. I made the conscious decision to actually divest from Facebook when COVID-19 started. It was just far too much negativity for me. And when and if I do go back to Facebook, there will be some serious culling of my social circle there required. But this is not anything new. Of course, the streaming wars have been going on for a long time. Everybody trying to take a run at the king of the hill, which is Twitch. The Amazon contender, of course, right now. But Mixer had launched with sort of lukewarm reception in the beginning. It was really intended to integrate well with Xbox and sort of be a platform that was geared towards Microsoft and Xbox gamers, but open to the public at large. Of course, it was the only really option they had if they really wanted to play in that level, no pun intended. But I thought Facebook was interesting because as a digital marketer, I do a lot of work in the demographics that these platforms serve. And I know the Facebook platform just served primarily the highest volume users on Facebook are in the 55 to 65 year range. So you got mainly 55, 65-year-olds. I don't really know if that is going to be a prime target audience for video game streaming. But there are also some stats that I came up with that I thought were surprising. I wasn't really expecting. So they've grown to 120 or 102 million viewers in 2019 on Facebook. Mixers was sitting at around 119 million before the close of the year. Twitch, on average, had 2.7 billion views or hours viewed for 2019. So some pretty significant deviation in viewership there. Obviously, Twitch has tremendous amount of loyalty, and I think that was kind of underestimated. The way I called it out is like what struck me was the way that Mixer delivered this. It was very much like a high fives all around. What a great thing we're doing for streamers. And like, in addition, we've also struck a deal with Facebook to adopt those streamers or whatever. The demographics don't really add up, though. It's unfortunate because a lot of big streamers left their long-standing gigs with Twitch to join Mixer. Of course, they were paid handsomely, so I have a hard time having too much sympathy for folks like Ninja, Shroud, who I think were paid a purported $30 million or something like that, or it was something silly. What did I get to here? Had these written down. Yeah, so Tyler Blevins, who you might know as Ninja, was purportedly paid between $20 and $30 million US to join the platform when he made that switch from Twitch. And I drew that stat from GeekWire from a report that they submitted a little while ago. So a lot of money involved. I mean, they're going to be okay, but a lot of streamers really had a hard time. And on the day when they announced this, if you looked at kind of the browse listings on Mixer, there were a lot of streamers that were really bent up about it. This is a challenge when you stream for a living, right? You always have to be smart about how you're managing your income. I think a lot of young folks get into this because it's why wouldn't you want to? Like, it's highly attractive. You're going to play video games for a living, sure, but you also need to grow up quickly in the sense of how you are managing that money, thinking about your future. You're not going to be able to do this forever. And what happens when your platform folds? I've been saying this from day one. I use Twitch as the example, which has a lot of staying power and stability. But I was like, what if a platform folds and this is no longer an option for you? What do you fall back on? right? You got 30 years of video game streaming. That's really hard to transfer to anything else unless you're going into influencer, right? You carry those audiences. There's some benefit to it there. But for those who are kind of middle of the pack or just emerging and just starting to think about how to make this a full-time gig, it can be an extremely big hit. And they can often be stuck not really knowing where they're going to go from there. We have, a couple of things specifically that they're doing for viewers and partners. Of course, viewers for the most part. If you have money tied up in that system, they're crediting that back to you in Xbox game cards, gift cards rather. So hopefully that's of some use to you, because if you've, invested, then you should be, recognized for that. Partners specifically, their partner status will be carried over to Facebook if they want to take that option. And any embers or sparks that they've earned revenue through the channel will be honored for June only. So, they're honoring double payment for the month of June only. So if you do have favorite streamers over on Mixer, make sure they use all those things. Mixer had a thing called open monetization, which is sort of like the affiliate program here for Twitch, where if you had a particular amount of frequency or volume or followership, then you were actually eligible to monetize your stream. So those types of monetizations are also being carried over to Facebook. But I'll be honest with you, it is not one for one. Like it's really kind of a crap deal for gaming streamers. Like I said, the demographics on Facebook gaming right now are not that strong. It's most likely going to be a much stronger opportunity for those streamers to either go back to or switch to Twitch, which of course is where I'm at as an affiliate channel. Twitch is where my exclusivity needs to be as well. I kind of dabbled a little bit in Mixer separately, but it was just more of like an aside or an afterthought. So it wasn't worth it for me. Unfortunately, I wasn't invested in that platform, and frankly, I wouldn't early in the game. If I was looking to diversify that way, I would do it but obviously, I'm kind of pot committed with Twitch like a lot of my friends are. So we'll keep doing what we do. And when you get involved in a bigger platform like that, it comes with stability. It comes with loyalty. And I really do think, unfortunately, that Xbox and Microsoft as a large corporation maybe underestimated that loyalty quotient. And I've seen this. I've worked for a lot of big organizations, global retail organizations who do this. They say, we got a huge bankroll. We can front this for a year. We can push it through with cash. And we hope that when we do it, that we can use cash and our buying power to kind of push us to the forefront. And I think they underestimated what that was going to take to usurp, the undisputed king right now, which is Twitch, right? And that's it. So on that note, I am going to segue into the new streaming show and schedule that I kind of announced this week. I talked a little bit about some of the content changes that I'm making. A lot of you who followed me recently probably know that I came out pretty kind of fast and furious. We're publishing like 20 plus content pieces a day on Twitter, and by we, I mean me. 6 long form YouTube videos every week, hundreds of hours of editing, post-production, thousands and thousands of words written in articles and things like that. So I had to really kind of constrain what I'm going to do. I'm going to start with Twitch. We're going to get back to the norm here. So every Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern, we have 2Play, where Steph and I will get together and play video games together. We either focus on couch co-op 2-player games, or we'll pass the controller back on great new first one-player releases like The Last of Us 2. We've been having a really great time with it, passing the controller back and forth, and we have great banter. We have a lot of laughs, so I hope you join us Monday evening. Every second Wednesday, bi-weekly Wednesday evening at 7 p.m., we have what I call the DMs Guild Feature Showcase, which is my community D&D streaming game. We welcome community members to play with me at the table, and that features third-party adventure module content. So adventures and campaigns that are written by some of our great third-party content creators in DMs Guild. And then, of course, Saturday every morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, right here on the Speaking Common D&D Weekly News, DM chat, game prep, game planning, and map making, which we'll get into later in the show. I'm really excited for that to go into my digital map making suite. So this is the schedule that I'm formalized. Of course, all this information on www.shambazelgames.com, which I'll continue to write for. What I also want to stay focused on are these kind of segments, the podcasts that I produce. I return my attention to Charisma Check, Seth, who was with me when we launched Charisma Check as an online streaming actual play, very Critical Role style. It was live in the room, multiple cameras. I moved away from that because it was too much tech to focus on during the game, but we've moved it to a podcast now. So that's available, and I've got episode 5 out for that. So we're going to continue to get back to editing and producing that so I can get it out for you. Good to see you too. We'll hear, that's wonderful to get back people here. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's been really nice. It's been nice, and it's been a great re-entry back into the Twitch, the streamosphere, if you will. So I'm excited about it. I'm going to be turning my focus on this segment, the Speaking Common weekly D&D DM chat and game prep stream, to focus on game preparation, game building, things like that. That's really where I want to put my attention to. So really this evolution is more about me turning back to my roots as a DM and focusing on dungeon mastering, gameplay, game building, design, and all that kind of stuff. And that's where I think I really want to hammer down. So that means I'll be continuing to keep up on the D&D news, but I won't be producing a daily news piece, which is about 500 to 800 words every single day. That saves me about 2 hours in the day. I'll be getting back to my roots in Twitter content, less of the video, every post being a video post, because that's extremely time consuming and actually was costing me the bulk of that 30 plus hours a week I was putting into content. So I'm streamlining that a little bit. Steph and I are going to be bringing music into play. So some of our jam sessions, we're going to be doing things like that, getting a little bit more into music streaming. So what's not changing, what you can still expect, are great DM and player tips every day on Twitter and through our streams. Or my streams, rather. I keep saying our, but it's really me, and this is the challenge. I'm like a one-man shop. But I'm looking into some really great opportunities for partnerships, and I'll really looking forward to sharing that with you when the time is right. We have some really great neighbors and fellow creators in the Twitch community, and they're incredible. I'm super excited about that. I've been doing it alone for a very long time, and I think it's time for me to lean into community a little bit more and participate that way. I don't need to be an island. And I don't need to take on the extra stress that trying to be an island actually creates. So it's about community, right? And I always say that. So it's time for me to take my own advice on that one. So we'll still be doing like question of the day, fill in the blank, DM tips, all that good stuff. So some things to look forward to. We'll continue to do D&D rule solution, as well as the Sage Advice Unfurled compendium breakdown every week. So those are things that I'll look forward to continue doing with you. And then finally, as I mentioned, the last news item I want to hit on is I kind of asked myself this question this week: is D&D fatigue setting in? I think invariably when people really go big and hard on a particular brand like Dungeons and Dragons from Wizards of the Coast, inevitably those audiences and consumers will want to branch out into other flavors. And I found that for myself too. So I petitioned the community this week to let me know what they think are some of the other systems that they really enjoy, that they like to play through. And I had some great feedback. So there are some of the usual suspects in there, like Pathfinder from Paizo. There's Starfinder, of course, under Paizo as well. GURPS, the generic universal role-playing system, and as well as some up-and-coming new tabletop role-playing systems as well, like Contingency System, which is developed by a great friend of the show, Josh, of course, at Contingency System. And from that, I kind of whittled down my top 10 list of systems that I wanted to delve into. And I haven't really done the math, so I'm just kind of compiling them. But Fate, always skimmed the Fate and Fate Accelerated system. Esper Genesis was another one that came up. Of course, Vampire the Masquerade. Call of Cthulhu is one that I really want to check out. Powered by the Apocalypse system, which seems really versatile and popular too. Dungeon World and Dungeon Crawl classics on the typical fantasy side. There are a couple of Star Wars platforms that I want to look into that are really exciting too. Of course, Shadowrun, Cypher System, Numenera, and Savage Worlds kind of rounding out that list. So these are all ones that I'm going to look into over the next little while. Just do a little quick summary, and I'll produce a piece on that. So I still want to write, I still want to publish for the website, but I'll probably be doing that one kind of big feature piece every week rather than one news piece every day. And that's what that's going to look like going forward. And expect me to start branching out into other systems. I think I'm going to start with Pathfinder from Paizo because it's a little bit more of a familiar cross-section of the fantasy that I'm used to, a little bit of an easy way to kind of branch and reach out of Dungeons and Dragons. Don't worry, though, I'm still going to be focusing on D&D for my channel. So I'm still like D&D focused. That is going to be my focus. But there's no harm in trying other flavors and introducing other great tabletop opportunities into our set, right? So that is a wrap for the D&D Weekly News this Saturday, June 27th. Lots going on in the news, lots of changes for the channels, and I'm looking forward to what the future of content looks like for Shambazzle Games as we build it together as a community. As I mentioned, if you're not doing so already, toss me a follow on Twitch/Shambazzle Games, and of course Shambazzle Games everywhere on the internet. I look forward to seeing you there, and join me Saturday morning, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, for the Speaking Common Weekly News. Let's head back to the bar.